What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I'm going to be talking about the top 10 cliche knife nut expressions that we as the knife community are all guilty of using. We use these expressions basically to transition from one point to another or one topic to another conveniently. And that's great when it's, each other fellow knife nuts, but it actually has a negative impact on the newer part of the knife community because they don't know what the heck we're talking about a lot of times, and it probably makes them feel isolated and like they can't ask questions for fear of being pointed out as the new person, and that's not good. That's not healthy. The other thing is that if I'm being honest as a reviewer, sometimes I use these expressions because not only because they're convenient, but because they cover such a broad spectrum of aspects of a folding knife in such a foggy way that it kind of leaves it up for interpretation, between each individual person. So sometimes it's not a super real or super definitive thing that I'm saying. And the whole idea here is I want to make fun of myself just a little bit and kind of, all like, haha, let's laugh at ourselves as the knife community because we're all just a bunch of nerds who like knives. Anyways, I stole this idea a little bit from a video from Blade HQ I watched about a year ago called Stuff That Knife Guys Say. I thought it was hilarious. It was a great idea. Some of these were taken directly from the video and modified a little bit, and some of them were taken from the comments section because there were a bunch down there that were just gold. So I just wanted to point that out there and give credit where it's due. Also, I have a bunch of new patrons. Thank you so much to all these new patrons helping me support my goal. If you guys don't know what's going on, follow the link in my description to my Patreon. There's a little note that's in bold that explains what I'm doing. Basically, I'm going to give away an awesome knife once I hit 50 patrons. This knife giveaway will be free to enter for everybody. You don't have to be a patron. You don't have to be a subscriber or anything. You just have to basically be paying attention. I would recommend that you subscribe so you have information. But anyways, Matthew Harris joined the Metal Army. He is a new Metal Knight. And he did request a shout out. By the way, if you become a patron while I'm doing this event, you can request a shout out as long as it's appropriate for YouTube. So what he wanted me to say was, if I'm being completely honest, I absolutely despise my Boker Mermaid for everything that it is, and in particular, that ridiculous fin flipper. Oh, Matthew, how dare you force me to insult my queen? There will likely be repercussions for that off camera. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on here into my top 10 list. So, number one, the first cliche expression. Oh, that knife makes a great beater knife. This is often said about the Rat 1 and similar knives. Basically, knives that are inexpensive, that we as the knife community who have evolved into purchasing more expensive knives and, love them. What generally comes with that for a lot of the collector community, I have to assume for a lot of people, is the more money you spend, the more you kind of tend to baby the thing. You're a little bit more concerned about what you'll cut with it, who you'll let borrow it, just whether or not you're constantly cleaning it. Knives that are considered beater knives are knives that are, they're a good design, or maybe they're not a good design. Maybe it's a knife that you just don't care about because it's cheap and poorly made, or it's a knife that's made really, really well with decent enough materials, but it just didn't cost enough money for you to care about it. Truthfully, a beater knife is any knife that people just use as a tool with no concern for how it looks afterwards. That's really what it should be, but it's not what we mean when we say that. So it's not it's not 100%. Excuse me, sorry. I always get text messages when I do this, but it's not exactly what you think we mean. So feel free to use whatever knife you want to use. If you like using $20 knives, use a $20 knife. If you like using $600 knives, use a $600 knife. Anything can be a beater. We just like to pretend vaguely that it's a very specific category. Not all of us are guilty of that, but I am definitely guilty of describing things like that. Next up, fit and finish is spot on, guys. Look at the fit and finish on this guy. It is just excellent. So spot on all the way around. Fit and finish is just perfect. Does this sound familiar? It sounds like me in every single video. So what we're saying here is that the knife and all of the materials that are used in its construction are put together in a way where there's attention to detail and care. Why does this matter? Well, good fit and finish is generally a direct representation of you know, the overall quality and the tolerances of the knife. You want everything to meet up correctly. And it's confusing because somebody who's new may not know that there's a difference between a knife with good fit and finish and what they're used to, which is not as good fit and finish, you know? Things like the scales not being flush with the liners underneath. Things like gaps between the G10 and the pivot. Maybe a wonky edge grind or bad symmetry. Maybe imperfect centering. Maybe a lockup geometry that doesn't make sense, or overly early or overly late lockup. There's little things like that, but as a reviewer, I'll pick a knife up and just be like, look at that fit and finish. Oh boy, would you just look at that? Take a look at that fit and finish. Let's turn it this way and take a look at the fit and finish on this side. That's just excellent. That doesn't make any sense to somebody who's coming into this. It's just kind of, it's just, it looks, you know, it's a thing that I'm using to describe the visual appearance of a knife, and then we move on, and then you know, new people, I'm assuming, are just sitting there going, I think he's talking about how well it's put together, but I don't know. I definitely don't want to speak up and put a big neon sign above my head that says new guy. Anyways, moving on to number 8. Oh man, such a great knife. Big knife, tactical knife. It's got, you know, the aluminum handles. Looks great. It's got the grip tape. And of course, M390. I mean, come on. You know it's premium when it says right there on the blade, M390. I mean, that's just, you know, that's as good as it's going to get. Anyways, moving on. So, you know, that's a problem because we know in the knife community, we know M390 is kind of like top dog right now as far as what you expect on a premium knife and just in terms of its performance. Now, we also know that depends on heat treat. There's a bunch of different things. Not all M390 is created equal, but the general consensus on M390 is it's a great steel for a pocket knife. It has excellent corrosion resistance and excellent edge retentive qualities. Now, I don't say that every single time that I review a knife. And it's also, you know, people who don't know, you know, about steel, they probably think, you know, a lot of my friends that I've shown pocket knives to that carry knives, they don't really know a lot about them. They think steel is steel. They have no idea that there are higher grades. I mean, literally thousands of grades of steel, probably a lot more, you know? Not all steels were originally designed for knives. In fact, very few steels were designed for knives. A lot of them have crazy industrial applications. A lot of them are formed differently. Some are powder formed, some are ingot formed, you know, whatever. So just saying like M390, oh, you know, it's premium, and then moving on, it doesn't really explain things. You know, yeah, there are videos out there to explain steels, but it's such a commonly used expression. I remember being new and just having someone just go, oh, M390. So you know, I mean, it's premium. And then just being like, well, I guess that's the steel I have to buy. I feel obligated to buy it now because everybody said, you know, so that's kind of toxic. Or not toxic, I don't know. That's just something that I'm guilty of for lack of wanting to explain it and for lack of, I mean, truthfully, for lack of totally understanding what I'm talking about. I'm not a metallurgist. So it's easier for me as just a regular knife reviewer to just be like, I mean, you know it's premium when it's M390, and then just move on because it doesn't invite questions of my professional background when it comes to steel. I'm definitely guilty of that. Moving on here, the next cliche expression. Oh, that knife just locks up like a bank vault. Oh man, take a look at that again. That bank vault lockup. Oh my gosh. So what the heck? What do you mean it locks up like a bank vault? Like I've got to punch in a code to get it to disengage? Like there's that big, what do they call that thing on is it the ship helm, the steering wheel on a ship? It's like one of those on the front door of a, that's what I imagine in my head. Like a bank door coming to a close, and then there's all those bars coming in from the left and right, like clang, 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 and then that thing in the center goes, that's, I mean, you know, that's how we describe, like, we're trying to describe it's locking up solid, but really it's just a feeling of solidity in the lockup. It's a series of clicks, right? It's initially the breaking of the detent. There's a click. There's another click here where the detent ball passes over that little ramp right there. And then the final click, which is actually impact, in this case, of the thumb studs resting against the titanium frame and the lock bar sliding into place. There's a lot going on, a lot of metal clicks and clangs versus something like a liner lock, which simply just pushes the liner into place. Is something like this locking up that much more sturdy, and is there that much more of a benefit in the way that it's designed than this? And if there is, honestly, it's probably marginal, but gosh, it makes an awesome, satisfying sound and feeling. So we describe it as locking up like a bank vault. That's a little bit misleading to somebody that's new because it leads them to believe that you're gaining some sort of additional benefit in durability that is vastly superior to other forms of knives. It's used it's used as an expression and when describing a lot of different locking systems. So it's confusing, and it sort of gives this false sense of durability to a newcomer. So, oh good, I love more text messages, please, while I'm doing a top 10. I'm a huge fan of that. Anyways, moving on here to number 6. Oh man, I love the Manix 2, and especially the way it just melts into the hand. This is a little bit easier one for people to wrap their head around. I mean, obviously, melt in your hand means, it's perfectly formed to the hand. But I think the biggest problem is you have knives like the Manix 2 that have sort of universally accepted good ergonomics, and then you also have knives that are just, individually between different people. That knife might melt into their hands and not melt into other people's hands. It depends on what you're looking for in ergonomics. So a lot of this is just subject to individual opinion. And also, actually, me saying that the Manix 2 is universally accepted as a knife with good ergonomics is also not 100% true. While a lot of people might agree on it, I feel like sometimes people agree on that just because they see so many other people agreeing. I feel like I generally do like it, and I feel like the reason that I can say that is because I also really like the ergonomics in the Hinder XM18. And as one of my viewers pointed out a long time ago, probably the reason you like those two knives is because ergonomically they're almost exactly the same, And I didn't realize that, but there's a little bit of validity there. Now, for the most part, I think a lot of people will agree the Hinder XM18 and the Manix 2 have excellent ergonomics that melt into the hand, but it doesn't always mean the same thing, so we use it a little bit loosely. Moving on here, number 5. Oh, that detent is just perfectly tuned. Perfectly tuned detent. The detent ball, of course, falls into the hole right here, this point where the blade falls back into the handle, this click. That's the detent ball falling into a hole. Now, if it sinks in a little bit further, and I'm not a detent master, if it sinks in further, it creates what we call a heavy detent, which means that you have to add more kinetic energy back here on the buildup of the flip before the detent is broken and the knife swings into place. For me, it was right around the time, like when I started hearing the uproar, the big, sort of bonfire ignition about this topic was when ZTs and Hinders, when Hinder knives and ZT knives were first collaborating, and there was an issue in the Generation 3 and Generation 4 XM18s with the detent being a little bit too light. People didn't like this because it had a flipper tab on it and it wouldn't really flip correctly. So these were $425 knives, and then their ZT counterparts were actually running about $200 and were flipping substantially better. The remedy for this, in this case, was just that the detent was a little bit heavier, and it was also running on bearings. So the combination of those two things with ZT knives, specifically the ZT Hinder, was creating a much better feeling detent. Now that has since changed. Those days are long gone. Hinders flip exceptionally well with the addition now of the tri-way pivot system, allowing you to put bearings, phosphor bronze, or nylon in any of your Hinder knives, and they flip excellent. That all kind of started to come about for me, or I started really paying attention to it. So I was like, well, wait, so perfect detent is defined by ZT knives, or, and then as time went on, these other companies started to figure it out. But also it's a little bit different if you're talking about a flipper knife versus a knife with a hole in it, like a Spyderco, or a knife with a thumb stud opener. It's all different depending on what type of knife it is, what the locking system is, how heavy the blade is, the geometry of the blade, whether or not it's on bearings, the relationship between the deployment mechanism and the pivot. Perfect detent it's so all over the place. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just somebody going, I understand how this knife is meant to deploy, and when I go to do what I think is the right way to deploy it, it does what I expect it to do. That's what we're saying there. That's really, that's really what we mean. Moving on here to number 4. Oh, that knife is super slicey. That is such a slicey grind. I mean, take a look at that. Nice and thin behind the edge. Oh, that knife is super slicey. So I say that, and actually a lot of people made fun of me for my old paper tests, which were meaningless. If you check out my Instagram, or you check out Super Steel Steve's Instagram, you can see the meme that he made of me, which is 100% true. It's just, I was just taking any knife, dragging it against paper, and I was giving you my impressions of the resistance on paper, which doesn't help anybody. And pretty much any piece of metal or anything that starts out thin that can be sharpened will glide through paper. So that's not really meaningless. What we're trying to say there when we say it's a slicey blade is the blade, is ground in a way that puts up minimal resistance when, dragging it through material. Some people will say that for anything that's just sharp enough to cut anything. They have this wedge, and when they put it up against a piece of cardboard and push, it splits the cardboard. Some people might describe that as slicey. Some people might describe slicey as cutting a human hair under a microscope, and instead of just splitting, it explodes. Have you ever watched that? Somebody, like a blade that's so sharp when it goes to cut hair, it actually starts like spitting micro bits of the hair everywhere because it's so sharp. So everybody's got a different definition of slicey. And when we say slicey, it's very vague, and then we just move on. Moving on here to number 3. This knife is really more of an office carry knife. This is more of a knife that's, it's really meant more for an office. We say that, and what we mean is this knife is not intimidating. It looks like a generic pocket knife. It takes 2 hands to open. Generally, when we think of an American office, we think of a place that doesn't necessarily demand, a big blade or a blade that opens, in a tactical way. But I have also described my Lion Steel TRE as a great office carry knife, and it's basically a tactical one-hand manipulated titanium frame lock on bearings. So it's a smaller version of this, which both of these are an entirely different category of knife than the Victorinox Cadet. So we say that, but what we mean is just it's less intimidating, makes more sense for an office. It's not really maybe not a knife that you would think of when you're thinking about going camping. The problem is we refer to knives like the Victorinox Cadet as more of an office carry knife. We forget that they actually are incredibly useful tools when you're outside. I mean, I use that thing outside all the time. So that's a term that is not directly applicable to one specific circumstance. We say that, but what we mean is it's small and it's not intimidating. So that's very confusing and misleading. Moving on here to number 2. This is one of my favorites because it is this statement right here causes more argument than anything else in the knife world. I'm actually going to use 3 different knives to describe what people think they mean, what newcomers think seasoned knife people mean, and what we all probably actually are trying to say. This knife is perfectly suited for more hard use type tasks. I don't think anywhere on the internet, anywhere in any discussion groups, any physical clubs where you can go and talk with people in your social circles, anywhere where knives are made, I don't think there is one universal definition of hard use. That is one of the most misleading things that we can say in front of newcomers, because we all have different definitions of hard use. Some of us define hard use as just making heavy pressure cuts for long periods of time, but you're still using the knife as a knife. Some people define hard use as sticking the knife in a vise and shooting it with a bazooka from 100 yards. That makes no sense, and I'm being sarcastic, but you go watch some of Cold Steel's lock tests or destruction tests, and you'll get where I'm coming from. You hear it about knives like the Hogue Ritter. You definitely hear it about knives like the Hinder XM18, and they also hear it about knives like the Cold Steel Tough Light. Now, here's the problem. $625 knife or $425 without the titanium scale, $155 knife, and $22 knife. So that's confusing enough because newcomers tend to correlate price with how durable it is and how durable it looks. And then you've got knives like this, but then you have to learn about the locking system. A lot of people talking about how the Cold Steel Tough Light is the strongest lock out there, which is another sort of vague thing that people don't talk about. I have a video about locking systems, but so it's super confusing when we say hard use, because we all, and I do this too. I'm like, yeah, this knife is more set up for like more of the hard use stuff. Hard use probably more closely to what people are trying to say, whether they know it or not. And I don't want to speak for everybody. I'm just going to attempt to define this a little bit more clearly for newcomers. Hard use probably means a task that you might be using a knife for that you probably should not be using a knife for. So in which case, you should probably be using a fixed blade if you feel like you have to use a knife, or the knife is the only thing at your disposal. And within, the parameters of said task, there is a higher chance that you will damage or break your knife. That's more so probably what people are getting at. And what I would suggest, the reason I brought out that Moore knife is because it is a fixed blade. It is an inexpensive fixed blade. It's a fixed blade that is designed well. And if it breaks or you mess it up, it's not that big of a deal. That's more so what I think people sort of collectively mean when they say hard use. You kind of cross the line from reasonable task to, should I really be using a knife for that? That's kind of more so what people mean. The Moore knife is just here as a suggestion. Obviously, there are plenty of expensive knives that you can use for hard use tasks in some situations. There are obviously folding knives that are, built in a way that suggests that they could handle a little bit more abuse than a standard Walmart folding knife that's made out of plastic and super thin metal, but it's a case-by-case thing. There's no universal understanding of it. You don't have to feel like you're missing out on some specific definition. It's just something that people like us use to transition or just move on with, in my case, the video or the review. Finally, number one, my favorite and my most hated at the same time. And I hate this because I hear other people say it and I'm like, describe what you mean for the rest of us, or for me, I want to understand. And I also say it because I use it in the exact same way. I say it all the time and it's so misleading and it's not really all that helpful. I mean, sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And I would say it's the most confusing expression that we all use. I love this knife, honestly. I love it. I love the design. I love the look. I love, what I can use it for. But honestly, it's way overpriced. We say that all the time as the knife community. I'm using the Shaman because it specifically, is it's viewed like that. It's viewed as a knife that is loved by so many, and it's a design that is accepted by most corners of the knife community. And here's what happened. The knife was released, and it was more in line with the pricing on knives like the Manix 2 and the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. This was, back then, I believe the PM2 was $135. The Manix at base was still $110, $115. And then the Shaman came out with the same base steel, S30V and G10, but it was contoured, newer design. They had a $155 price tag on it, that was all right. I think most people are okay with that. Then it really started to take off, and they hiked the price up to $187, $180, something like that, and people were in an uproar, And understandably, people were in an uproar because what's the extra freaking $30 for? Why are we having to pay this extra $30? Well, yeah, we don't like that, and so we consider the Shaman to be overpriced. But then these newcomers are like, well, people are saying it's overpriced, but like everybody has one. Everybody likes it, So the truth is that sometimes there are things that the vast majority of the knife world considers to be, overpriced, or people are paying too much money for it. But they still like it enough to go ahead and buy it. And what we need to understand from that is we can yell that as much as we want about models all day. Sometimes it's true, and the direct effect of it will be that people won't buy it. And sometimes people will be upset about it but still buy it. And what that proves is that if the market will support it, the market will support it. If there is demand for something, then that demand for it is enough to justify that price, then people will buy it. Things, items, materials, material possessions are worth whatever people will pay for it. You could have 100 people in a room, 99 of them could say, yeah, I'd buy that. There's always going to be at least one guy going, nope, I'm not going to buy that. You know, I think another great example of that is the Ontario Rat 1. There's not many people are still going, you know, $42 for a knife? Who would ever pay $42 for a pocket knife? Well, there are people who say that. People who are aware of the Rat 1 know that it's a great model made with great materials for a great price. But that doesn't mean that there's always going to be somebody not agreeing with it. We always want things to cost less than they do. You know, if the Shaman only costs $155, there'd be a handful of people saying, why is that thing $155? It should be $125. And then you'd have a few people in the back going, I never pay more than $20 for a knife. You know, it's just, it can never stop. So yeah, I mean, as far as like, you know, what happened with the Shaman, that definitely has created a circumstance where most people are in agreement that it is overpriced. Has it stopped it from being a popular model? No. Does that mean you as a newcomer won't get the enjoyment or the use out of it for the money that you pay? I don't know. I mean, you know, I did a video on diminishing returns. You have to make that decision for yourself. You know, don't let that dissuade you. Check into things for yourself. If the person who's giving you the information is not defining exactly what they're talking about appropriately, then yeah, at that point, ask questions, you know? And if the person's a jerk, then they're going to come down on you for asking the question. But if they're not a jerk and they're a true, helpful knife guy, they're going to help you understand exactly what people are talking about. And I'm going to try and do better about that because I am definitely guilty of every single one of these cliche expressions. Okay, we're at 26, well, it's 27 minutes. That's going to be pretty much it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you at least found it entertaining. If you did, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So check that stuff out, and if you enjoy my content, then please subscribe to my channel because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.